Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the panel portion of the evening. Again, my name is Sharad. I'm going to be the moderator. I recently started an organization called Imagination Dialogue, where I take on interesting conversations with gentlemen, as you see here today. And we're going to have an interesting conversation about what we saw. So who do I have with me? I have some really interesting gentlemen. To my right, I've got Joel Backen. And Joel is a law professor, I guess our academic, and but he's also a writer, and he wrote the film The Corporation. To his right, I have Mark Brandon. I think of Mark as a young man of the people, the social entrepreneur. I used to go to his restaurant, Bonita, and have a great social time there. To my left, David Berg. You're a senior advisor to RBC, and you're kind of the representative for RBC tonight as well. You're the CEO of Underdog Ventures, and we'll talk about what you do with RBC and other companies and your own company. And then to the very, very left, you might have seen him on TV. We have Brett Wilson here tonight. And Brett is known for many, many things on television, but there's the things that we don't know about him and the things that he does are things that I want to bring out tonight as well. So Brett, thank you for being here as well. So ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the panel discussion this evening. What is your definition of, after seeing this and being a part of this, of conscious capitalism, and what's your opinion of it?
I think I'll just go with the opinion. I think by definition it is just those two words.
Yeah.
I don't know that you need to elaborate on it whatsoever. It is that being well-versed with what you are doing with your money. And I think the most important part, I'll segue instead, is that consumers are the entire driving force of it. We can do whatever it is that we do, and Daryl can do what he does, and that's great.
Yeah.
But if nobody darkens my doors, then it was all for naught. People understand, they pick you apart, they get it, they spend their money wisely, and we have to continue to be difficult on our friends and our peers and our family about how they spend their money. And every company, from mine to RBC, call them on their metrics and where they spend and what their profits are. That's conscious capitalism. And do we need it? We're all dead without it.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think there's nothing that new about conscious capitalism. When Adam Smith wrote his Wealth of Nations, he talked about the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. He had a vision of small business, like the kind of business, the butcher, that Mark Brand is in, at Save On Meats. And I think when you're in a small business, I mean, my grandparents were, they owned a corner store in Brooklyn, New York, and they were, they extended credit to people who were impoverished. They helped their community. They were part of their community. They provided food security in much the same way that Mark Brand purports to do in the downtown east side. So I think when you've got a small business, there's no separation between the business person and the business. So you can talk about consciousness, you can talk about conscience, because the person and the business are the same thing. When you have a large corporation, you have a system that's designed to actually undo consciousness. You have a system where the company is legally required to, it has a fiduciary obligation, a legal obligation to put its shareholders' interests first. So yes, it can pursue CSR and social objectives, but they always have to be shared, to quote Michael Porter, with the primary objective of making a profit. So conscious capitalism within corporate capitalism, for me, means strong regulations, means strong democratic structures, means that people can actually participate and have rights to participate in determining the trade-off between profits and social goods, means that you have social programs that enable people to pull themselves out of situations like they are in the downtown east side, means that you have a taxation system that supports those social programs by taxing businesses rather than waiting for them to be philanthropic. So that's what conscious capitalism is for me.
That was, I repeat, the academic of the group.
Hopefully it wasn't that obscure.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic. I'll go to my right here, my left here, yeah.
Well, I'm always drawn into this question, I guess, about whether this is something new or whether this is something old, right?
Yeah.
So I think the notion of an intentionality around impact first, about measuring our success as humans by the biggest differences that we make with our ventures and our enterprises, there is something new about that. But I do think it's intriguing that the most interesting parts of social ventures and social enterprise are about moving back the clock. It's all that kind of James Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, that moment in the Run on the Bank, right, where he's convincing everyone, like, your money isn't here. It's not here in the drawer at RBC, in the case of RBC, right? That like in the movie, right? Our funds are all out there in Underdog. Our funds are out there in the Luna Pads of the world, in the renewals of the world, and we want to get back to that notion that what we do with our money, that relationship that we have with our dollars, and that those dollars have with companies here in town, that it makes a difference. And so I think that's a very old-fashioned notion.
Well, when I first got the email with the questions, you will recall...
There was an email with the questions?
There was an email with the
They
questions.
skipped you and I.
and I saw this concept. It was the first time I had seen the words conscious capitalism.
I created it myself. Thank
And,
you. Thanks, Brett.
I thought the concept was kind of stupid.
Okay, I'll take it back.
And I'm going to kind of go the opposite of the academic approach here. And again, I've been active in the business world using charity as a business tool for 30 years. And I'd never heard the term conscious capitalism. So I looked at it and thought, what is unconscious capitalism? Is there such a thing as the opposite? And then as I worked through, saw the trailer, which is all I had to work with, I came to the conclusion that what conscious capitalism was a metaphor for caring capitalism, that there was an element of more than just profit. There's different ways that corporations are held and owned, and sometimes there's a perception embedded in the movie that profit is bad. I hear this sometimes in the not-for-profit world, and I think the folks in the not-for-profit world have to think hard about how to create enough capital to cover their overhead and to cover growth so that they too can change the world. I get where they want to go with the concept of the fact that we can, with a business, using more than just profit as a driver for shareholder value. And I actually happen to believe that charity is good business. And if I may, I'll just quickly talk about, I am a cancer graduate. I'm not a cancer survivor. To me, graduate is an empowering term. But if I was just a cancer survivor, I would have barely made it. And the next time cancer came around, I'd be fighting again. So if I may, let me introduce the concept of corporate social opportunity. Changing the world is an opportunity. If we take away from the lexicon the concept of obligation and responsibility and substitute opportunity, as Mother Teresa said, no act of charity is too small. And I love the work that's being done at Save-On because you see it as an opportunity. It's part of how you build your brand. And the work that Underdogs do, I get that. But if, again, I would just tear the word responsibility out of the lexicon of conscious capitalism.
So a lot of thoughts are going, yeah, thank you. Wow.
No. We got a whole night ahead of us.
Councilor Woodsworth back there?
If you've been drinking, I can tell. But I appreciate your support. And that's not my daughter. My daughter's over here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In any of the cases of the people that would come onto Dragon's Den, was there ever an angle where instead of the profit that's going to be made from this business plan, was there this idea of social responsibility that would ever come into, oh yes, that's a great, like, did that ever make a play?
Many times. In fact, one of the most powerful was a woman named Barb Stegman who came to me and said, I'm going to take oils that are gathered by the women, children, and farmers of Afghanistan and take that essential oil, that organic oil, and turn it into a perfume that we will then, for profit, sell. But she said, there's nothing charitable in what we're doing. We happen to be socially responsible in terms of the fact that we're changing the lives of the women and children, but our motive is still profit. Because guess what? With profit, we buy more oils, we buy more inventory, we build our brand, we can buy more product. That's how we grow. And so there's no shame in her mind that she's creating profit, but it's socially responsible by outcome.
Do you see in your business these business plans that are getting approved, for loans or for grants or whatever it is that they're asking for money-wise, that have a major social responsibility component, maybe lacking a profitability?
There's a mythology about a business plan. So the notion is you're coming to me as a venture capitalist to invest in a company. Maybe someone's just gotten out of business school. They spent the whole next year coming up with a plan of a socially responsible business. The odds that any business plan will ever happen are 1 in infinity. That's just math problem. So we know it's not going to happen. So we're looking for someone we want to go through bad times with. Mm-hmm. And when people are really intentional about the reason that they're in business, not about what their business model is, because the model will change 2 or 3 times. The reason probably will not. We're talking about investing for 10 years, right? A lot longer than the average marriage. So we're trying to figure it out, like how can we make that long-term bet on a person who's going to have a failing model?
I want to go back to you about that. You're telling us, yeah, some days you're going to take a loss. Tell me about that, yeah.
David nailed it on that, and he has inherent knowledge because I wouldn't be sitting here without him. He actually was the one who took a very large risk with his institution and convinced them that I was a good idea. They're still not very sure about all of that. But we do go through, we've been through the bad times together in multiple institutions, and all of my employees, from the guy who works 4 hours a week who has severe Down syndrome and is one of the best people we've got, all the way up to the top of the food chain, we are there for the commonality of the goal, and the goal changes. But what it really is about is making sure that there is somewhere that is a haven, a community place that people feel comfortable and safe and can be fed really good food in a very particular area. We fail epically all the time, and we lose people. And I don't think there's any shame in it because we learn a lot every single day.
I want to ask Joel this question. Is this considered business in the end?
Yeah, it's business, and I guess that's the problem. And somebody needs to say this just to make the
I want it to be said.
One of the lines in the film was that it's by mobilizing consumers. I didn't hear the word citizen mentioned once in the film. I didn't hear the word democracy mentioned once in the film. I didn't hear the word union mentioned once in the film. I didn't hear environmental activism and activists. I didn't hear political party. I didn't hear social democracy, socialism. I didn't hear any of that. The impression I got in watching that film is that we have to rely on well-intentioned, and they are, and it's wonderful, and I take my hat off, but we have to rely on well-intentioned business people to find congruences between profit and social good. And that's what we have to depend on to save the world. That's not going to cut it for the radical social inequality that's getting worse and worse, for the climate change that's affecting our world, for the horrible conditions, for Bangladesh and factories collapsing. Walmart and Joe Fresh and Loblaws, all of those companies have resisted an initiative that was brought by unions and NGOs to try to create binding standards for factory safety in Bangladesh. They said no countless times while purporting to be socially responsible. Business is not going to solve the world's problems. It's a part of it, but it's not all of it. And when I watched that film, the very dangerous message is that somehow entrepreneurs, Branson's a hero? I mean, I'm sorry. Anita Roddick is a hero, but I interviewed Anita Roddick, as I did Milton Friedman, by the way, and what was said he would said today is wrong, because I interviewed him just before he died, and he stuck to his guns, but he didn't say what was said he would say. But Anita Roddick said one of the most wrenching things in her life was what happened to the Body Shop after she sold it to a company that took it public. That she started that company in her kitchen. She started it as a small, the candle maker and the butcher and the baker. That's what and she had social purpose, and that was great. But once it went public, she lost control of it. So the thing that I find dangerous about this film is this suggestion that all of these other things that we need to save this planet and life upon it are just invisible. So the thing that I find dangerous about this film is this suggestion that all of these other things that we need to save this planet and life upon it are just invisible.
Wow. That's great perspective. Any comments to that, in big business and venture? Yeah.
Well, clearly with all the cheering, it wouldn't be the right place to step in with a comment.
Do it. Go. Please go.
No, I think that there's another piece to it. And I think that, I don't want to be apologetic for business, because I don't think business is the only solution. It's the reason, like in our case, most of our assets are held in our foundation, and there's a lot of stuff we can do in the foundation that I'll never be able to do in the business. I'll also say progressively more every year. There are a lot of things I can do through the business that I could never do through the foundation. One of my favorite parts about this kind of impact investing or conscious capitalism, or I hope we won't spend the whole night, fighting about the words, because I think the words are maybe not that relevant to me. But I think what is important is that it makes for very strange bedfellows. There are deep activists that are working with companies in partnership and doing things that could never have happened 10 years ago. And I think that is it's a story worth being told. But not, again, without saying that there's not another side to it.
Joel, you're...
We should get a clap-o-meter.
Well, I've had one standing.
Yeah. Isn't there an app for that? Isn't there an app for that? Yeah, I'm sure there is. Yeah.
Joel, when I heard you say that one of the messages in the film was that entrepreneurship might be the answer, I didn't hear that as clearly. What I heard was a conversation has to start about what more we can do. Has corporate America, as the general term, or corporate world, done a very good job in the past, whether it's the responsibility to the environment, responsibility to the people, responsibility to suppliers? No, it hasn't. But it's been our job as the society to hold them accountable, and we haven't done a very good job of that either. So there's an abdication of responsibility if we say it's just corporate America that should be improving, because we can make changes, especially with social media. We can make decisions about who we buy from or who we don't buy from. We can hold people accountable in ways that we've never had the tools to do before. The way that Bangladesh came about in terms of the response of Joe Fresh and others, Loblaws, was the social media backlash. It wasn't just the press. So I think there's more, and I think what I heard in this message, again, there were some things I didn't agree with in terms of kind of that tone that profit's not good, but maybe I was just listening to my own messaging. But what I did hear was that there is opportunities, and we don't want to lose those opportunities.
The reasons why I'm coming from where I'm coming from is the research I do. There's a way in which businesses, and mainly large businesses that I study and I interview, and there's a sense in which they're saying, now that we're socially responsible, we don't need government regulation anymore. It's a quid pro quo, it's a trade-off. So all of the deregulation we've been seeing is very much justified by the fact that there's a take-up of CSR. And this to me is very dangerous because I don't believe CSR can do what democratic regulation of economic activity can do. And yet one is being traded off for the other, at least in the consciousness of big business people. I don't think that applies in the small business domain as much.
I have a great sensitivity to what I call private equity. Then there's personal private wealth that owns companies, whether it's Pattison or Brett Wilson or whatever, but it's privately held companies. Then there's widely held public companies. But there's another group called private equity, which are the groups that are being driven off of Wall Street, where the greed is good concept is still front and center. And I lived in that world. I don't like the metric. They're going to drive earnings, which are sometimes, if not often, at the cost of other things that would be considered good for society. I am scared by the proliferation of those groups.
This is a very interesting conversation because when Loblaws started talking about Joe Fresh and trying to address to the public that we want to be responsible for this, this term greenwashing. I came very late to the game of recycling. I'll admit it. I don't think about those things, and people are thinking, oh, we have to do it because it's the right thing to do. Is that's what's happening? Is it's like we might not care, but we have to do it? Because I believe
but they're getting dragged into that context
of
responsibility because they haven't seen what an incredible opportunity it is. You see it day to day. When someone walks up with a chip and they walk away with a smile, that's a game changer for me. But you see an opportunity. You don't feel an obligation to those people.
I also see an opportunity for a conversation, and there's conversation starters and there's conversation enders. That right there, and I mean no disrespect because everything you said I agree with wholeheartedly, is an ender for people who are first coming into a conversation. Like, oh my God, it's too big for me.
I totally disagree.
Okay.
I think it's a conversation starter as to how we can revivify our democracy as to what we should be doing as individuals outside the business context. That's a conversation starter. To me, it's a conversation ender to say that it's just all about business, that there are no other places where we can play out our lives as citizens.
I don't think the documentary does that at all. I think the documentary focuses on one small thing and tries to shed some light on it. I don't think it tried to attack the larger issues at all. I think it just tried to show 4 or 5 business people trying to attempt something and show a little bit of societal impact and what it was, but trying to attack all of that is a much, much longer documentary that I don't think anybody could sit through without a pee break.
I couldn't.
Which is interesting because I do remember conversations with Daryl. His ideas, maybe in the documentary were localized to a lot of situations here, but I think his ideas were a lot bigger than that as well. I mean, I'd love for you to chime in sometime. But, because you're right here, I would love to even ask you, was your idea the small piece that Mark is talking about, or was it a bigger idea? I'd love to have your commentary on that.
All of you are right in your own way. We're talking about business. We're talking about the role that business plays, and I don't think that to Brett's point, we don't bring up. We don't attack profit. We're all about profit. It's about embedding social responsibility and delivering profit. Thank you. It's about delivering profit and social responsibility. And to Joel's point, and I have a man crush on you right now, is that we play as entrepreneurs our own role. And that is what we can control, and that is our enterprises. And what we're seeing time and time again is that corporations that are committed to embedding generosity outperform traditional for-profit only corporations on financial metrics. Okay? And so that's the role that we can play as entrepreneurs. By considering all stakeholders, we can make a difference, and we can leave the world a better place because of us. We're not anti-union. We're not people that think that we can't count on the government or that we can neglect government regulation. We're a little bit more pragmatic in the fact that the political cycles are a little bit too short for our initiatives in terms of really making a difference in this world. That's really the perspective. I'm not an environmentalist. If I am, I'm not a very good one. What I'm here to do is help reshape and reinvent capitalism and use it as a vehicle of doing good. And I'll just say one more point because I'm not on the panel. We work with a company called Sitka, which has some retail stores in Victoria and Vancouver. It's a surfwear company. If you speak to the founders of Sitka, you ask them what business they're in. They say, we're in the wilderness activism business. Oh, and we sell clothes. But we really exist to conserve wildlife for future generations. That's why we grow our revenues. So we say, well, guys, who's your competition? And they say, well, really our competition is Monsanto and Stephen Harper. So that's the next generation of entrepreneur that is coming up. And they're a stand for a world left better because of them. And that's what we're talking about in this movie.
So back to the panel here. Is there a transition point from unconscious people who are doing business to a consciousness level? Is there a time where I've made so much money, now I can start thinking about the conscious stuff?
If we can, let's try and not launch it off that one, because that's
Sure.
another old school notion, is when you get rich, then you can start to work on this stuff. And I think that's very counter to what I see with the entrepreneurs that we work with. Is there anything different in this group of entrepreneurs? I would argue that there is something really significantly different. Like all the businesses that you've talked about, every one of these entrepreneurs understands that profit is an absolutely key component to success, or you can't survive as a business. But it's a result of running a business well is profit. Profit is not the product, and it's not really even the target. But every single one of these companies, right? I look at Luna Pads and say, does this Africa program make sense? I look at Mark's chips and I say, 10 years ago, does this make sense? Is this a key part of your business? That with new entrepreneurs, instead what they're saying to us is, that's not your business, that's my reason. I will run a business good enough, smart enough, fast enough, successful enough that I can afford to do the things that I love because they're important to me. You hear that language a lot more, I think, with new companies.
Can I ask Daryl a question? So here's my question. You
do have a microphone, Daryl. Yeah,
I'm into this.
Here we go. You have an analysis of the traditional corporation that's not dissimilar to mine. We both agree that setting up a company where where managers and directors are legally required to pursue profit above all else, and making it illegal to be genuinely socially responsible is a bad thing. So you are advocating the benefit corporation, a B corporation, which I think is a great thing. Right now, it's completely voluntary to become a benefit corporation or not. Would you be in favor of creating a political activist movement to try to make it law that we have only benefit corporations and we do away entirely with the traditional notion of profit-first companies?
I'd vote for that.
Yeah, well, but that involves political action and activism. Business people can't
But
do
see,
it
Joel, that implies that it's all about responsibility. And I've been on a number of corporate boards. I've owned interests in hundreds of corporations. I've never once had a conversation that dealt with that line that I saw, that we are only obligated to profit. Every corporation I've been involved with has understood the value of their brand is tied to the value of the work they do with their clients, their competitors, their suppliers, the communities they work with, their pipelines, whatever it is. There's more to it. And so I see it again, if we start trying to embed it as corporate responsibility, we're using the wrong part of the lexicon. If it's an opportunity and we show people, as much of this show did, that there's an incredible opportunity as a competitive advantage to use charity. We shamelessly, as an investment bank, said our charity budget is our marketing budget. Our marketing budget is our charity budget. There was no shame in that. We ran circles around our competitors because we owned relationships through the work we'd done in our community. I just see it that we're chasing the wrong. I like the idea of the B Corp. I'd never even heard of it. And I've been in this business for a long time. So I'd never heard of it. I like it. But I think if we start to move people down the path of understanding that it's such an incredible opportunity, we don't even have to have that conversation.
So let me put a hypothetical on the table, sorry,
Yeah.
because I want to hear. Tobacco, right? Let's say that we did an analysis and that it showed that the externalities that are created by tobacco just so far outweigh any social contribution that that industry provides, okay? You go to the board. It's American Tobacco. You read their annual reports. They are sustainable from the bottom up. They're looking for opportunities to have biodiversity in their tobacco plants, to create safer products. I mean, it's like this film. It's like these are wonderful people doing wonderful things. When I want to say to them, you know what, the socially responsible thing to do, not opportunity, is for you to go out of business.
You know what, we're not going to argue on that point, because obviously the full cycle of their business product includes cancer and death. So there's a whole lot more. If they were if their product covered the full cost of their cost to society, just as Seagram's and alcohol or
Napalm
any other
manufacturers, weapons
bombs,
manufacturers,
guns,
yeah.
yep. But then we're getting into the product, not the concept. So I agree with you that there are products.
And we don't want to get too arcane, but it is interesting if you look at the history of public companies, right? Going back to early England, even early in the US, but English public companies, when they first came up, they had a public charter. And the notion of being a public company, if you read the history, is that you had to get that charter renewed. You had to show that there was a public benefit to your company in order to renew your charter. And we've gotten very far away from that because to raise public money, you had to have public benefit.
You guys saw the opening statement of this movie. We have made immoral behavior profitable. Daryl, I want a rebuttal for Joel over here.
I don't think I need a rebuttal. I mean, ultimately, you know, is there a place for a political agenda around this? Yes. Is it my agenda? Not at this time. You know, the fact of the matter is that Institute B exists to be a beacon for old school, traditional, for-profit only capitalists to see that, hey, if I live the ideals of the Declaration of Interdependence, which is the B Corporation mandate, you know, if I can combine all those things and make more money, then I will be convinced that this is the right way of operating an organization moving forward, a for-profit corporation. Here's the thing, is I have 2 kids, and if I say to my son, Kai, do your homework or I'm going to take away your spinach. Dude's not going to do his homework, let's be real, right? But if I say, Kai, you know, do your homework, I'm going to take away your iPad, I understand his currency. So what's the currency of for-profit only traditional capitalists? It's money. So if we can actually leverage these ideals and make shareholders more money by being stakeholder theorists, then we win. That's what this conversation is for us.
I agree.
I want to add something to that. In this day of social media and media, I think there's an ego issue as well, aside from money, because of the name and the brand that could affect the money as well. I want to ask everybody on the panel, are there companies out there right now that you guys consider getting away with so-called social murder?
Tens and thousands.
Yeah.
I mean, just we got 15
Okay,
minutes.
yeah.
I mean, come on.
Apple's been criticized for using low-cost labor in certain areas, and we can find a metric that could criticize virtually every corporation. So I think embedded in a lot of this conversation was trying to find those things that are positive and build on those. Because if we reward the positives, that will become the opportunity.
Well
Let me
said.
give a general answer to the question, and that is, and people often ask because of the film, The Corporation, they say, so are there any good corporations out there? And I say, this isn't an analysis of particular corporations. It's not an attempt to say that business people, CEOs are bad people. It's an analysis of an institution that I think is flawed and that I think many people agree. I mean, I come at this as a lawyer. I'm a lawyer and a corporate lawyer, and I look at the way that the corporation is legally put together, the incentives that creates, and I say this is an institution. I end up agreeing with Milton Friedman on this. This is an institution that is not created to do social good. Now, you're not a for-profit corporation. You are in some kind of, there are many different...
There's a blend of lives.
Well, and as you pointed out, there are closed corporations, benefit corporations, sole proprietorships. I'm a corporation, okay? The corporation was made by a corporation, the corporation film. And I'm a business person. I go and give talks for money, I write books, I make films, and I make good money doing it. So it's not about business, and it's not about every kind. The city of Vancouver is a corporation, but the particular kind of corporation, the for-profit, publicly traded corporation, is legally put together in a way that creates incentives to make profit by not doing good. There are people within those companies that fight that, but they're kind of like the hockey players who win the Lady Byng trophy. This is a rough and tough game, and then a few people manage to win a trophy for being nice, right? And so there are some of those out there, but basically the game is a brutal game, and it's set up that way by the law. And the law in democracies is something that can be changed, which is why it's so important to not collapse ourselves into just consumers, but continue to think of ourselves as citizens who can actually change things like the DNA of the publicly traded corporation.
Well, it's good to hear that someone else is optimistic.
I'm totally optimistic.
Because, it's true that business, right? Business is messy. Private companies are messy, and even the best companies do bad things. But I think you latched onto something that is intriguing to me, that there is maybe a reason to be more hopeful than we would have 10 years ago, right? And again, I have to acknowledge that there's a difference here in the Canadian economy and the US economy. So some of these changes will be slower coming to Canada, mostly for reasons of how much of the largest 100 companies are extraction companies up here.
True.
So in the US markets, the massive majority of the value of the markets today, in the public markets, the vast majority, over 70%, is brand value, it's not hard asset value. And that is a huge shift from old car companies and real estate companies and mining companies and oil companies. It's a huge shift. And so what it means is where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, your value to a company in the restaurant was the $12 you were going to pay for you and your two friends. Today, as you pointed out with social media, the value you can have on a brand is massively different. And so the behavior of public companies to address stakeholders and shareholders and voice is really different than it would have been. And that's not to glorify it. I just think as an activist, there are reasons to be more hopeful than we would have been in the past.
I want to now engage the audience here. Ask questions back to the panel and also share your comments about what you saw today.
I'm just curious in directing this particularly to, Mr. Becken, mentioning about the role of government in bringing in rules and regulations. I worked in the finance business for 40 years, and I have to say, governments are late to the party. They bring in the regulations after it doesn't matter anymore, and they dismantle them before they do again. And we've seen Glass-Steagall and his successor as an example. I think using government as a tool to shove things down people's, corporates, whatever's throat, is not the incentive. I think the opportunity is really the better idea, and the question is how you make that happen and how government can complement that as opposed to being a hammer.
Well, I guess the problem is, I'll try to be brief, is I believe in democracy, and there's these people, business people, don't represent me. They represent their shareholders, they represent their employees to some extent, but unless we're prepared to give up on the idea of democracy, then we have to see it as our project, just like these folks do to make business better. We have to see it as a project to make government work better. We have rights as citizens, we also have responsibilities. And we need to exercise those responsibilities. We need to become involved. We need to make sure that governments are accountable, because they're not. I agree with you. But a large part of the reason they're not is because businesses are lobbying the hell out of them to deregulate. So I would say, as a, you know, if I were king of the world, which isn't very democratic, but if I were, you know, the first thing I would do would be to pass, and I write about this as a legal scholar, to pass laws to restrict lobbying, laws to restrict campaign financing, laws to give a leg up to advocacy groups and whatnot so that they can go to the Democratic table and argue their case alongside the representatives of business who have these increasingly cozy relationships with government officials, especially in the bureaucracy. So, you know, I can't agree more. Government is broken, but we need to fix it, just like we need to fix business. And I guess what was frustrating to me a bit about the film was not seeing that interplay in the film. I mean, business only exists because governments do. There would be no market if the state didn't create contract laws and property laws. And, you know, we live in a publicly created world. So we need to take control of governments again and make them democratic.
Joel, I'm like really saddened by your reliance on government, and this movie to me is a great example of what people are just doing on their own. So much is happening outside of government. What Mark is doing, organic food movement, B Corp, all happening outside of government. So if you want to keep hoping and leaning for government as change, you can do that. But I'm watching a city and a world that's changing from entrepreneurs that aren't held down by corporate structure. I don't know, I listen to you and I hear a pessimist, and I look around this room, I know the work Mark's doing, I know the work that Brett's doing. I'm an optimist. I see this as a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the pie. We're spreading the word. It's not business and corporations or business and government, it's business and people. So we need to be looking more at people and what we're providing for people and their values, because that's really what we're here for.
For the last 200 years, we've fought and we've died to create a system where people actually have rights to be involved in self-government. It's called democracy. And what saddens me is how quickly people seem to be willing to let go of that.
Quickly, have you not been watching what's going on over the last 200-300 years? This is a time of people to people is what I see. And so I'm continuing to lean in that direction with the other people there on the panel. I'm really saddened by what I've heard.
Well, I'm not as cynical about democracy as you are.
We have another comment over here. If I know the microphone.
I have to start this by saying I'm a former city councillor, and if you think if any of these businesses could have worked in Vancouver without the city council, you're really, really wrong. And what we have a government for is to ensure that there's some semblance of public good. You have a democracy to make sure that there's healthcare and education, welfare, affordable housing, all those things that make society work well, and for the regulation that Joel's talking about. And I find it very curious, there's so little discussion in the movie about workers, about the living wage, about credit unions, about that all these other very viable ways of distributing and making sure money works for everyone around the world. Because capitalism is eating itself up and taking the whole planet with it, and we're here saying something has to be done about it. And we have to use something that works in a way that's fair for everyone, and government is one mechanism to regulate that and address that. So I wonder if you could say something about living wage, which is a critical mechanism, and something about the credit union movement that got going in Canada in the 30s.
Yeah, if I could offer, those are academic questions. Joel?
I want to argue.
The credit union movement in this city started with a bunch of people who shine shoes for a living and needed to basically buy equipment, and out of that eventually grew, you know, Vancouver City savings, and it's a crucial. Credit unions are a really important sort of antidote to banks, especially when it was much more difficult for people to meet the credit requirements of banks. So yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you say. I really don't have any.
And not just cooperatives, right? Cooperatives, nonprofit structures. Right. You're seeing a lot more forms of ownership springing up, and I think a lot of those have been tied into, although it's not in the film, you know, if you look at the B Corp, and if you look at the things that qualify you as a B Corp, ownership is one of those issues, and ownership both by workers and by broader investors as well. So it's absolutely key.
I have Maureen up in the balcony here that I know.
I don't actually need a mic. I'm Maureen McGrath, and I host the CKNW Sunday Night Sex Show. And as they say, I want to say that the documentary was amazing. Mark Brand, Save On Foods, has the best mashed potatoes I've ever had in my entire life, and I don't even like mashed potatoes.
I think Jimmy Passenchef wrote you check every time
that's
somebody
right.
gets it wrong. Thank you. I'm calling Jimmy tonight.
But gentlemen, I must state the obvious. Criticism is the only way we can succeed, and feedback is a gift. And I'm really curious why there are no women on your panel. How many women are starting businesses today, and how many small businesses are started by women entrepreneurs? And the other thing I would like to put in there as well is great to have a social conscience and capital consciousness, but we also must remember the women in the world, because 1 out of 3 women are sexually and or physically abused at some time in their lifetime. So when we think of how we're going to help businesses, let's take a look at the workers in those businesses, that they are treated fairly, that the women are not sexually harassed. But I would have really loved to have seen Madeline on that panel, or Denise on the panel, or some of the other fabulous businesswomen we have on the panel. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Maureen.
It's a really good comment, and I am sad to speak as tonight's only woman on the panel. Sandra Odendahl was supposed to be here this evening, and 2 nights ago had something come up. There was a crisis in Toronto and couldn't fly, so she asked me to step in on her behalf. So I'm embarrassed to say that I can't fill her shoes in that regard. I would point out to the crowd that one thing that is absolutely critical and hasn't been talked about enough, maybe in the film or in the comments tonight, is that, you know, if you look at the women's economy, for far too long, like the immigrant community up here, I would say, is in a similar situation in the sense of it's a majority, right? And we treat it like a marginal part of the investment community. If you look over the next 5-year period in the women's economy, we'll move from $13 trillion globally of earnings to $18 trillion. That growth is double the growth of the Chinese and Indian economy together. So none of us are doing any good if we start to marginalize the women's economy, and I do apologize on behalf of Sandra for not being here as well.
My question was more related to the comment you made, Brett, earlier about how you didn't know about a lot of this. And so I got into business 2 years ago, read the literature, and I found a study saying it's 10 times more profitable, you retain your workforce, and you're like, that makes absolute sense. So how can you make that sort of thinking more mainstream and not make it about us versus them, old versus new, but more about it is something that makes sense, it's an opportunity. How can you make that mainstream?
If you didn't hear the comment, it was along the lines of she's been in business for a couple of years and has very quickly discovered in the literature that being socially responsible appears to be good business. So why worry about, and again, keeps going back to my view that opportunity over obligation. And where does that go? It all starts with a conversation. The very conversation we're having here, and all of us are, I mean, I haven't heard any fundamental disagreement. There's a range here, but we're all moving in the same direction, which is doing things that are changing the world for the benefit of the world are good for business. It's that simple. I mean, and that's where it's going. And I would suggest to you that a business that doesn't take that into account will lose to those who do. And that's okay, because that's the way capitalism works.
You know, I think the whole film is laudable and going the right way, but I think there's absolutely no room for complacency. And I think, you know, the comments made by Joel are absolutely right, because what we've seen over the last 10 years is polarization. Companies like Apple not paying capital gains, you know, not paying income tax, a whole raft of things that have made ourselves a very unfair world. 400 people in the US, $2 trillion. More than the GDP of Russia. That's the world we're really living in. Walmart, the guys from Koch brothers, all in the top 10. One may not state that they've done the best things. And here we are with, you know, Royal Bank, Gordon Nixon making $15 million. TD Bank now awarding their $2 million to Ed Clark as a pension. So when he's 92, he'll be getting $2 million as if he hasn't put enough away while he's been working. That's the real world we're in. And there's an awful lot of change that's got to happen if we're going to make all the supposed ideas really take place. Any comments, especially from David the banker?
That's pretty direct.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I could say the part about agreeing with most of what you said, right? I mean, there has never been a time in human memory where there have been so many differences between the haves and the have-nots. So this can't be ignored. And I think in that context, speaking again as a representative for RBC, but also as someone who runs a very small foundation, I'll say that this is about creating real human relationships. And that the kind of differences we're talking about making, whether it's RBC or whether it's Underdog, it's going to happen one investment at a time and one human being at a time. Because if we don't create the human relationships to move this stuff forward, it's just not going to happen.
I think the film is interesting in so many ways and has so many positive things to say. But while this wonderful development is taking place, as the gentleman back here referred to, we've had this incredible devastation of corporate concentration. And today we face the extinction of the planet and the human race by the economic involvement of non-renewable carbon energy burning. And I refuse to be distracted by these rabbits. And I have moved my money away from any organization, which includes the Royal Bank, which will not divest itself of these kinds of investments. And there's just a little bit of movement that maybe many more of us need to make.
Any comments on the panel?
Yeah, it's fundamentally flawed. I'm sorry, but the idea that you're going to pull your money out of anybody who's actually producing energy or power from carbon-based sources is fundamentally flawed. The harsh reality is that your choices, solar is uneconomic, wind makes no sense because it's not sustainable, nuclear still has an issue for a lot of people in terms of waste, so we are a carbon-based economy until we become a hydrogen-based economy. That will not happen in your lifetime or mine.
Oh, man.
Thank you.
Oh, man.
I do have a question right here.
Is it a question? Are you sure it's a question?
I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question. Okay. Yeah, it could be. Yeah, we don't know.
Daryl, thank you for providing this wonderful soapbox for everybody today.
I completely agree there's a huge opportunity here, and I completely agree that we should be making profit, and we should be making it make sense. You shouldn't be forcing people to drink something, you should be giving them a way that they just then naturally follow. I also think that most of the economy today has been built around the wealthiest in the world. And I think there's a huge opportunity for catering to most of the world. We're talking about, 8 out of 10 are on less than $5,000 a year. Is there a place for banks in the future, and what is that? How are they going to transition to help create the world that we need to see?
I think there's a place for banks in the future. I'd like to think that for all of us it's easier, at least a bit, than carrying around big chunks of iron and handing them back and forth. But that does bring up a really good point about the banking system, right? There is something uniquely attractive for activists about banks, and it's because it's one of the few companies that has a product that is absolutely exactly identical to every other competitor's. We have a $20 bill, they have a $20 bill, and you choose which one you're going to borrow, which is how we make money. We don't have anything different in a product from one bank to another. It's how we do our business.
So you charge different fees?
Absolutely. And again, without getting into the fee structure, what I'm saying is going forward, whether eventually that emerges into alternative currencies, that there will be a lot going on in the electronic space, a lot in the mobile space. There'll be a lot of new ways that money is moving. Crowdfunding, obviously, big change you'll see happening about how money moves into smaller companies, into private companies. And so on the good end, we're going to see a lot of change, and with that change comes opportunity. But again, it asks the crucial question, back to the question of how do we as a group then start to see more of that money going toward the things that we care about sooner. And in particular, where a lot of the most impoverished communities are very far away, that we have to link that through storytelling, social media, and to create that kind of human connection.
I
I've been hearing a lot about, there being other stakeholders involved in social impact outside of business, and I agree with that. And Mark, I understand from the movie that you've recently started a nonprofit in addition to your for-profit venture. I'm curious to get your thoughts around what the opportunity is there for-profit to, link up with nonprofits in other areas of the sector to create social impact.
Firstly, Heather O'Hara, who is also in the film, hopefully is in the audience tonight, hi Heather, runs a potluck cafe and is an amazing mentor of mine. I will get to your question by doing this. Janice Abbott, also an incredible woman, CEO of Atira Women's Resource Center, mentor of mine. Andrea Reimer, mentor of mine. Incredible women in the city who I would not have any couth whatsoever, what little I do have, without. We started a foundation based on raising funds that don't just serve the purposes of what we do, but to be able to serve the purposes of what others do. Because we make a lot of noise, we bang a lot of pots and pans, but people don't necessarily align with what it is that I do. Heather does what I do, but better, and she also helps me understand how to navigate the neighborhood itself. So if somebody else comes to us and says, hey, we happen to be in a shortfall of X, Y, and Z, the foundation and the charity is based there to have a board that consists of me as one vote and 10 others that are not involved directly with us that then say, hey, we want to move this money this way. And I'll apply for my own funding. I might not get it. Somebody else might. So I think that to be able to put money in a very specific area and say, we want to do work right here based on donation. Some of it can come from my actual for-profit endeavors because I am a capitalist first. I do have 11 cost centers and 9 businesses, including a brewery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This one I'm known for because people like it, which is a really good sign. The rest of our businesses are great, but my most famous one is a diner on Hastings Street. Then we're all winning. That's the part of the conversation is huge. So yes, I think there's a role for both of those things. There's a role for David's foundation and my foundation to work together specifically to say, hey, let's both fund Lunapad's expansion into Brazil because that makes sense for us and because we're friends and we're trying to make a difference, genuinely. Also, just really quickly, because I want this moment, I know for a fact that there's a role for municipal, provincial, and federal politics. And are they a little bit behind? They're a lot behind sometimes, and sometimes they're ahead of the curve. Some of the stuff that I get a chance to work with, Ellen, if I can just call you by your first name, if that's okay. Thank you. That felt kind of cool. I sat in dozens of hours of council meetings with Ellen, and things went forward progressively and shocked me that our council would actually say, yes, this is a good idea. So there's a role for all of it. And we do, as citizens, my favorite word of the night, have a responsibility to actually go and do these things, whether we're private business people, whether we're working for another organization, we have to take this into our own hands, vote with our minds, and vote with our money.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
Question right here. Yes, please.
What does a people-centric economy look like? And how do we get there? What is the critical path? What voices need to be heard? And what are the conversations that need to happen to be able to live and do a people-centric economy?
Are you asking me?
I mean,
I'll just try to be very brief. A people-centered economy is one where every person has basically the same vote, the same rights to participate in creating governance structures. That's not what happens in a consumer economy. In a consumer economy or a business economy, it's $1, one vote. That's how it works. I mean, if you're a consumer and you want to support or boycott a company, your power to do that is how many dollars you have. In an equal peoples-based economy, it doesn't matter how much money you have. Because you're a human being, you have the same right to participate. And Mark was talking in the film about the fact that he listens to people in the community, and that's great. But he also said, sometimes I don't give a shit. He has that prerogative because it's not a democratic system that he's working in. The people don't have rights to say, Mark, you have to listen to us, and if you don't, we're going to pass a regulation that tells you can't do that. He's a benevolent dictator. And benevolent, but a dictator, because the people don't have rights. He'll listen to them when he wants to. So that's not a peoples-based economy. It would take me a long time to talk about what it would actually look like. As a business person, I'm going to promote my books and ask you to read them because I talk about it there.
Wonderful answer. I have one question.
Give me one. Give me
Sorry,
one.
please. Yeah,
Give me one.
please. Yeah.
So I totally agree with what you're saying, but if I was a dictator of sorts, I would have to dictate that people came to purchase from my business, and how would I go about doing that? Would I force them to come and eat my eggs and say, hey, by eating my eggs, you will still enjoy the rule of the almighty and benevolent Emperor Mark?
And we didn't answer the second half of your question, which is how do we get there, right? Like, even if we could agree on what we were trying to get to, it is not clear how we would get there. Yep. In the last week, these are 3 examples, less than 20 seconds each. I was approached by, and we will probably fund a local company that is going to direct 10% of all their revenues to benefit global environmental groups addressing climate change. We put money into a small company, a conscious capitalist in California, who donated 2 shares for every share that we invested. We worked with a private family that wants to invest in companies that will then turn around and gift significant parts of their equity to benefit nonprofits. But how do we even begin to get that news out there? Because I am constantly wowed by the number of entrepreneurs that come forward saying, we didn't even know this stuff was possible. Like, we would love to be partially nonprofit owned. We would love to have our workers and the community and some nonprofits own part of what we're doing. That would be so cool. So the part of how we get there is, I think, what Daryl and others are working on really hard now, which is how do you even begin to share the stories of those who are doing it on the ground?
First of all, Brett, you were talking about it being an opportunity versus responsibility. And then the other piece was about the consumer versus the citizen. And my question is do we think that the consumer is ready and has the, for the decisions that they're going to have to make? And we're talking about the Polly Pocket Society that, you know, drove small businesses out of towns, and Walmart took over. And that's not very long ago. So is the consumer and their buying power ready to take advantage of the opportunity, or is it still a citizen thing? That's my question.
A small amount that grows exponentially by the day is ready for that, and that they remember it. And so something that David was saying earlier about us reverting also as business people back to folks that are still very much in existence today who said, I bought from my local butcher, from my local baker, from all of those sorts of things. There was a certain nuance to it. More important, there was a certain support structure there that they didn't realize was happening until it was gone. So people are getting that. They understand it again. They know they want to do it. But the opportunity is so difficult now because square footage is $55, and how do you get in there, and where does the investment come from, and how do you compete with big business? And so I think this documentary does a pretty good job of introducing that notion again, but also saying, yes, there is, you're going to vote with your money this way or this way, and obviously you're well versed in it. So it's our job as citizens as well to spread that. Why do I spend $15 at Oyama versus spending, you know, 12 at Costco? I do it because of X. And it's a very conscious decision. And it's also good cocktail banter on another level. When people come over to your house to eat and you can tell them where you got your blue hen from, and you can tell them where all this stuff came from and the impact that it has, I think those things will drive business back that way. Or I really hope they will, more importantly.
I was just curious to know, what is, like for some of the panelists, like what is your personal story behind getting behind the wheel of charity? And is it just a business decision, or is it something more? Is there any personal story behind, you know?
I'm going to take if I could, I'll take a book, a page out of Joel's book. I have a book. I would encourage you and others to spend $12, maybe $10. Yeah. I mean, my parents were classic community-minded citizens in small-town Saskatchewan.
But what's your like? I'm not talking about your parents. I'm asking about what about you?
The relevance of my parents is they were the role models in my life. My mom was a social worker. My dad sold used cars. They went door to door. They did everything that was possible in terms of being model community citizens. I had no idea they were that until later in my life when I look back. They were my inspiration. There's more in my book.
For me, I have no book. Don't even have a blog. So
I can sell you one of my.
I'm writing a book and I've got a blog.
But the shortest version, I guess, hometown of Spam, meatpacking town, Austin, Minnesota. Grandfather worked there in the first strike, 1934. Mom was there in the second big strike while people were beating the windshields and the lights of cars that went by who weren't protected by the union, and the town basically was a town divided. Father was a machinist at Weyerhaeuser in a box factory. Super hot, super loud, watched his knee and his shoulder go, and watched the company eventually force him to clean urinals because they had to pay his salary after he was basically destroyed in terms of being able to carry out his job. And without really knowing that I had made the decision, decided to really not only not have that happen to me, but direct all of the financial stuff that I do at, I don't know, underserved communities just sounds too glam to me, right? But there are a lot of people that haven't just been passed by, but have been intentionally left out of the capital loops, and that is most people. And so for us, there's a great opportunity in, I think, being able to serve those people with both capital and with expertise.
Mark, Joel, David, and Brett, thank you so much for being here.
See, we didn't set out to start, we didn't start out by wanting to make a movie. We were working on a curriculum. And when we did that, Rick, the writer of the movie, and Lawrence, the filmmaker of the movie, basically sat us down and said, you know, I think there's something compelling to be said right now. The time is right for this conversation to exist in the world. And as we saw tonight, there's a great conversation to be had.